So I'm very glad to introduce Victor. I did one of Victor's courses last year, which was a fantastic meditation course based on Rob Burbaya's book, Seeing That Frees. And I learned so much from Victor and from his approach to the Dharma. And so I'm really glad that he's here to give this talk tonight. So Victor has been practicing meditation for 35 years. He's spent over 2 years in total in silent retreats and has taken Dharma teaching roles since the late 1990s. He was co-founder of Sydney Insight Meditators and was for a decade chair of a small overseas aid organization, the Bodhgaya Development Association. He also trained in Gestalt Therapy and worked for years as a counselor. So I'll pass it over to Victor, who tonight is talking about what is a beautiful life.
Great. Thank you, Conan. Look, I haven't been here before. I'm just sort of curious. Where are you all from? Are you all in Sydney, or where are you from? Sydney nods. Well, I can see some of the faces I can see nods. Anyone outside of Sydney?
I think a lot of people in Sydney and some in Wollongong, maybe some in the Blue Mountains. We get people from the Sydney surrounds as well.
Okay. So that's in part why it's staying with Zoom. Yeah. Okay. Good. So I thought maybe we could just start with a bit of a settling meditation for maybe 10, 12 minutes. Sound all right? A nod? Yes? Okay. So I'll do a little bit of guidance here, hopefully not talking too much. It's a form of meditation, but maybe not the sort of meditation that's so common. So first, just being in a position where you're fairly comfortable and hopefully a little bit upright, or at least in a position to be fairly focused. Seeing if you can, in a way, soften the body. If there's any part that is tighter or harder than it needs to be. And seeing what might be prominent in the whole field of experience. You know, you could say the body field, emotional field. What perception or perceptions stand out? Could be an emotion, could be a bodily sense, could be a persistent thought. Could be like a tone. See if it's possible to to view whatever stands out with a sense of kindness. With a sense of warmth. So whatever comes to experience, see if it's possible, even in a small way, to have to relate to it in a warm, a kind way. Almost welcoming it. And then whatever else comes, also bathing it in a field of kindness. It could be, as you do this, you notice there's maybe not the detail or the precision that happens if you're doing mindfulness practice. Could be some of the perceptions or experiences feel a little blurry. That's fine. That's okay. Just over and over, bathing what comes to the attention in kindness, in warmth. So whatever comes up, even if it feels a bit monotonous, you could bathe that sense in warmth, in kindness. you may even have a sense of love to just simple experiences. The felt sense of aliveness. And then having a sense that we're part of a group. And including everyone in the group in this field of warmth. Field of kindness. And then when you're ready, coming back to the room, or at least our virtual room. Okay, good. Actually, out of interest, are people familiar with that sort of approach to metta? Yes, no? Yes, okay, one at least. Okay, so the talk. The topic is, what is a beautiful life? And that could be expanded a bit. It could be expanded to, what does it mean to live a beautiful life? And are we called as human beings for the possibility of a beautiful life, of sculpting, of making an art of our life, of making our life into something beautiful? It's a question. It's a question. And it's not a question that's the one that's always asked. You know, often what is focused on more is something like, what's a happy life? And that can mean lots of different things depending on how you see happiness. There can be more superficial happiness. You know, sometimes people think, okay, what about if we just live in a nice place, live relatively stress-free, we do lots. Some people, particularly when they're young, think, let's live life to the full, have lots of experiences, hopefully positive experiences, try to avoid pain, discomfort, and hopefully be kind. And that's sort of, to my mind, a fairly common view in our culture. But then there's sort of deeper happiness, and you sort of wonder, well, okay, what might that mean? And what are common sort of attitudes or views in the Dharma world? So we have this prominent image of a Buddha figure, often solitary, often looking fairly self-contained, looking wise, looking calm. And you think, okay, that's particularly in the West, the most prominent image we have in the Dharma world. Is that what we should aim for? I mean, to my mind, my understanding is that that image came at least a couple of 100 years after the Buddha. And you know, when you look at how the Buddha lived, he spent most of his life teaching. He spent most of his life helping others. But we don't actually have that image. We don't see that image up the front so much, helping others. We see the Buddha in meditation. And sure, that's an important part of the path. But meditation, you know, if you look at the Eightfold Path, 3 elements to do with meditative skill. So, you know, you think, well, is it a matter of being wise? Is that what the Buddha image stands for? Or is that what is held up as important in the Dharma world, rather than living a beautiful life? And I'm not saying it's one or the others. I'm just saying I think it's worth asking questions about this. So one approach to what does it mean to live a beautiful life would be to think of people who you see as having lived a beautiful life. And it could be their circumstances are very, very different to ours. So we're not in a position, or maybe we don't have the abilities or the circumstances to do what they do or they did. Still, it can be useful to think of people and see, well, what might a beautiful life entail? What qualities or factors are involved? So people that have come to mind to me are Nelson Mandela. So as you might know, he spent 27 years in jail. He could have got out of jail earlier if he had publicly said he'd never support violence to address the injustice of apartheid. Now, from his point of view, his freedom was less important than the well-being of Black people in South Africa. So, I mean, to me, that's a beautiful act. He lived a beautiful life. So, someone else that came up for me was, in more recent times, Alexei Navalny, the the Russian opposition leader who was poisoned and who chose to go back to Russia, knowing that things were not going to go well for him. And he chose to do that because he saw that he represented something for other people, and his presence there, even doing what he could, being in jail, meant something to people who wanted a different life in Russia. So they're political things. But, I also think of someone like Beethoven, who continued to write music. He could hear it, but he was deaf. He could never hear it played. To me, there's a sort of dedication in that. So those people, to me, they show a responsiveness to their situation. There's a dedication, and they take into account their own abilities, what they can do. But of course, they're really standout people. Yes, there's ordinary people. People who maybe even some of us, people who do maybe quite ordinary jobs or have done ordinary jobs and put their heart and soul into what they do. Could be doctors, nurses, journalists, musicians, actors, you name it. I'm not trying to limit it here, but it's almost like the relationship people have to what they do. So to my mind, there's a dedication that stands out here when you look at what might be behind a beautiful life. A dedication to the well-being of others. And sometimes, depending on people's circumstances, a dedication to people who are quite close to them, family or extended family. Sometimes it's a dedication to how society or other species live, maybe even people that the person's never going to meet, or creatures that the other person's never going to meet. Sometimes that's been divided in a way between what's been described as a love of the close, like family, and love of the remote. So love of the remote would be a contribution to the world that will touch people in a positive way, or an understanding or perspective that will help people, or a way of living that shows respect and helps other species. And, when it comes to a beautiful life, often people have that broad view. I remember there's a quote from Mother Teresa who said, the problem with the world is that people draw their family circle too close. So, she was saying, extend that family circle, extend it beyond your immediate family. And people's circumstances are different. So people's ability to do that, I think, can be quite different. And it tends to be, to my mind, people have some balance between care or love of the close, care, love of the remote. I'll look a little bit more at the love of the remote, but I think the principles might apply whether it's close or remote. So one aspect is, in a way, a dedication or honouring to what you're called to do, what you're drawn to do. And the second is, in a way, beneath that, reflecting on or determining what it is you can help with, what it is you're called to do. And that could be quite simple, or it could maybe not be quite simple. Quite simple, it could be just being kind to whoever, maybe. Or it could take more reflection in terms of in terms of values and in terms of how we live our life according to the values that we hold dear. That may not be such a easy thing to, in a way, live. It might take thought, it might take reflection. There's one in America, social activist I knew years ago who spent something like a year asking the question, how can I best help? In the beginning, she didn't have an answer. She just asked the question every day. That was her practice. So sometimes in this whole mix of reflection, there's the aspect of conscience. Conscience in terms of, okay, conscience is a way of tuning into values and a way of looking at how much is my life living in accordance with those values. And sometimes that's not easy. There's all sorts of circumstances we have. Circumstances don't allow us always to do what we would like. It's been said that, and I'd be interested in thoughts from those of you as old as me, that the word conscience doesn't get used as much these days as it did maybe 30 or 40 years ago. It's somehow gone out of usage a little. So afterwards, I'd be interested in hearing if some of you think that. I do. And that could be because there's been this culture of positive self-image, not feeling bad about yourself. Could be that the idea of conscience, the word, the usage has been sidelined a little. I saw this quote from, conscience is different from shame, but I think they're related. I saw this quote from an American lobbyist, Baron Edward from Cloberg. He said, shame is for sissies. So look, that's a cultural view. Maybe that cultural view was prominent for a while, hopefully not too prominent. When it comes to conscience, it's tricky. Sometimes we have inherited beliefs, and it could be people's conscience gets pricked when you don't live according to those inherited beliefs. So, you know, inherited beliefs could be something like sex before marriage is bad, or masturbation is bad, something like that. That's very different from conscience in relation to considered values. And so the conscience, I think, is more important, is in relation to considered values. And it would be great if considered values was not connected to beliefs, but I think it actually is fairly intertwined. So, you know, it's easy to say that we should focus on considered values, but somehow they're still connected to belief systems. So I'm curious, has any of you heard, well, any of the ones I can see, have heard of these Pali words, hiri and ottappa? No? 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 None that I can see. Okay, great. So hiri, these are words Buddha used. Hiri is a word meaning an innate sense of shame over a moral transgression. An innate sense of shame. Ottappa is fear of the results of moral wrongdoing, including fear of blame, fear of punishment by others, and fear of the karmic consequences. So karmic consequences could cover a variety of things. They could even cover the idea that once you do something that's not so good, you've set a precedent. And once you've set a precedent, once you've set a pattern, even the first step in a pattern, then that pattern is a tiny bit more likely to continue. So hiri, shame, ottappa, fear, apprehension of the consequences. Now, curiously, the Buddha said, well, in the Pali Canon, the Buddha is considered to have said, hiri and ottappa are the guardians of the world. He said, when the qualities of hiri and ottappa wane, become less prominent in a society, then the culture of that society degenerates. So he's actually putting a huge importance on those two qualities. And they're not qualities that in the Dharma world I've heard lots talked about. I have heard in the last couple of years, but not prior to that. So, shame is related to conscience. And conscience can be a bit more than, can be pricked more than just times when we do harm or when we don't follow the 5 precepts. I mean, the 5 precepts are a great starting point, but you know, they're not the whole caboodle. So you might know in the Christian world, there's this idea of sins of omission. You know, not something that you've done that's bad, but something that you haven't done So, there's an example you might have heard of. Let's say you're going to see a friend and you're late and you really want to get there, and you're walking past a small lake and you see a toddler that's gone into the lake, and the toddler is struggling, and the toddler looks like they could drown. So if you say, oh, look, I'm late, I'll just go ahead, that's not actively doing harm, but it is a sin of omission, in Christian terms. And I think our conscience would say, okay, that's something we should do. That's something we should do, despite being late. I mean, if you look at the traditional wording of the precepts, I undertake the precept of not killing, undertake the precept of not taking what is not given. They miss out on the sins of omission. I mean, if you take the broader phrasing, like, I undertake the precept of not killing and supporting life, or of not taking what is not given and cultivating generosity. So that wording is way more inclusive. It's way broader. And, I'm giving another talk here next week, hopefully. Hopefully some of you will come, and that's about dharma practice and climate breakdown. So when it comes to sins of omission, sometimes, it could be seen that our individual or collective, possibly individual actions to do with what's happening with the climate could be seen as a sin of omission. I mean, some people have also said, well, the way we're living, it's a sin of emissions too, not just omissions. Anyway, more on that next week. So let's get back to conscience. And, to my mind, this is just one aspect of what might be called a beautiful life, but it's still an element. It helps us tune in a way. It helps us tune in to what might be helpful, what our position allows us to do. So shame's related to conscience, and it's interesting, our attitude to shame. Some people just have a negative attitude to shame, but considering the Buddha considered hiri and ottappa, hiri being basically shame, so important, maybe our attitude to shame could be one where we see shame as being possibly quite healthy. And it could be shame to do with something we're considering doing, we are doing, we have done. Maybe it's not such a bad felt sense. And it's not as if you have to keep it there forever. There's a place where, in a way, it does its work, and there's a time for it to dissolve. But it does seem worth paying attention to our attitude to shame. And, in a similar way, conscience. you could see conscience in a way as a figure that walks with you at times, that maybe takes you to task at times, that maybe you're not always so comfortable with, but that tries to bring out the best in you. Maybe conscience can be seen as a helpful figure, a helpful quality. But the way we live our life, often it's not, it's often fairly peripheral. So, question, is that so helpful to have it peripheral? Actually, there's a book that came out a few years ago on shame. Very well-written book called Is Shame Necessary? New Uses for an Old Tool. And it's actually very, the book is mainly focused on shame as a tool in relation to corporate actions, so in relation to companies, but it's also to some degree talking about individuals. And it also talks about the risks. It talks about when shame should not be used. It's a very considered book. And, particularly with the way corporations like to keep an image in a particular, like to keep a positive image, I can see shame could be a really good tool. And shame is a little different from protest. So, going back, a beautiful life often tends to have a dedication to some values. And it also takes into account our circumstances, our abilities. So we might really admire the way someone else lives their life, but they're not us. For us to live our life in a beautiful way, that maybe takes some reflection, some thought, some challenge. And look, so far I've given some big examples of life of fairly famous people. But let me give you a couple of just very small examples, just actions which could be part of a beautiful life. Just by simple actions, nothing so special, nothing such a big deal. I was reading The Guardian Weekly a few weeks ago, and there was a story in a section called The Country Diary, and from someone in Ukraine, in Lviv. So just a little story, I'll read it. My name is Alexander Ruchko, and I am a bird watcher. Because I'm 59, there's still a few more months where I can be called up to fight the war with Russia. Lately, I have been leading bird watching tours around the parks in Lviv, my home. The tours are for refugees from cities around Ukraine, including Kiev and Kharkiv. These people have lost their homes, and some of them have lost family members. I'm trying to help them take a break from thinking of what is happening. So, that's a really simple act. It's what that person's abilities were, what they could do. It's no huge life-changing actions for people, but it's a simple act of kindness. And kindness considering, okay, what can I do? Tell you another story. And this is like, that story is one where he could see in a way the results, the outcome of his actions. But sometimes people, we don't quite know the results of our actions, and they might be very small actions, but if they're done with an attitude of kindness, they might really have an effect on people. So when I was young, when I was a teenager, I hitchhiked to Melbourne to see a girl I was friends with, and I spent nearly a week there. It was okay. It didn't work out quite as I had hoped. And on the last day there was an all-night vigil. I'm guessing it was against the Vietnam War, against conscription. And I went there. It was actually quite cold, and I was going to meet a couple of friends. They didn't come. I was feeling down. I didn't know anyone there. I lay down. I was going to go to sleep. It was cold. Someone came, and I did have some, I think I had some blanket or sleeping bag. So someone came and put the blanket or sleeping bag over me. Now that actually changed my view. Someone there, I didn't know anyone there, someone there was looking out for me. It changed my whole attitude. I don't know who it was who did that. They, I'm sure, I imagine, don't know that it made a big difference to me. It's a small act. It's a small act, and often we don't know the outcome of those acts. So it could be that's the simple way, acts of kindness, acts of trying to help, whatever small way we can. Maybe those acts also contribute to, or are one way, making up a beautiful life. Now, you might know in Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, there's the idea of dharmakaya. And I am no expert at all. But from what I gather, dharmakaya refers to the qualities or attributes of a Buddha. And I think when they talk about a Buddha, they're not referring to a particular Buddha. They're talking more about the Buddha heart-mind, which exists in a way, not on the material level, but still exists in a way that can be sensed. So if we go to the question that I started with. What does it mean to live a beautiful life? And are we called on as beings to the possibility of a beautiful life, of sculpting, of crafting, of making an art of our life, of making our life into something beautiful? So could it be that these questions touch to some degree on the way that we might be able to embody or reflect or refract some of those qualities or attributes of the Dharmakaya, the Buddha heart-mind. And maybe we're just able to do that on occasion. Maybe they're just instances when we can reflect those qualities. Maybe also it's worth keeping in mind those broad attributes, qualities of the Buddha heart-mind, and that could include beauty as well as wisdom and kindness and compassion. Could be something useful to just imagine, to just have there. So this question, what is a beautiful life? I don't know that we always need to have a clear or succinct answer to the question, but there's something to be said for having the question there. And maybe our answer will come in, maybe it'll come conceptually, but maybe it will also come in some way in how we live life. How we live life. So, look, let's have a couple of minutes silence, and maybe time to reflect on the question, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on what might make up a beautiful life, and on your thoughts on conscience and on whether you think it's a useful question, because it's different from the question of what's a happy life. Okay, so a couple of minutes silence. Okay. So, anybody has any thoughts, questions, contributions on any of that?
I've come in a bit late.
Enkon, hello.
But I'm tempted to say, it's beautiful what you've just posed. It's beautiful what you've just posed. Because to me, it's about the beautiful moments, isn't it? But perhaps the beautiful moments add up to what a beautiful life could be. You know?
Yeah.
It's moments of feeling good or feeling better.
Well, look, there's so many ways to look at it. Yeah. I remember going to the funeral of one of my parents' friends, and I knew this man, and I didn't know him very well. And when they talked about his whole life and what he did, I felt actually quite inspired by how dedicated he was to various things. What he'd done over his life. It stayed with me. That idea of a whole life and the contribution that person had made. And I mean, yes, in that life, there were beautiful moments, but there was also something, for me, beautiful and inspiring about looking at the life as a whole. Hang on, you're on mute. Yeah.
So that you're not only describing his inspirational, beautiful life, you're also referring to you felt inspired. So for you, for all of us, when we are inspired, we feel uplifted. So that is also a beautiful moment for us.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Somebody else. Frank, yes.
I might be wrong. I admit when I'm wrong. But beautiful life, the Buddha said, there's no happiness other than peace. If you're going in a good direction, that's what I call a beautiful life. Because the direction, success is not happiness. It's just a feeling disappearing very, very soon, like the Hollywood stars. So being on a good direction is a beautiful life. What I mean by that, my beautiful teacher, Aya Kema, in one of her last talks, she said to me, Frank, do not blame the trigger. And I said, what does that mean, Aya? And she said, when you realize that life is painful, dukkha, unsatisfactory, and changing all the time, every second, then when you feel unhappy, suffering, do not blame your wife, Mr. Morrison, the Americans, or your football team losing. Just watch the pain arising in the heart.
Yeah.
And forget the trigger that brought the painful feeling and suffering to you. And when I got home from Wat Buddha Dhamma Wise Man's Ferry, I said, yeah, for 1 month, that's what I'll do. Mindfully, when I feel unhappy, I have a look at the trigger, what was creating the unhappiness, but drop it straight away. And like my wife will be shouting with me and unhappy with me, I just smile and forget the trigger, forget it. I just think of the good things she done for me in 60 years of marriage.
Oh, wow. Okay.
After 1 month, I said, another month. Not blaming the trigger, the unhappiness I was feeling sometimes. This unhappiness is coming from the change around us, the anicca, and not the triggers. But we always blame the triggers, blame the opposition, the government, the marriage, the family, the job, you name it. So am I I am in a good direction. I know because I'm learning Dhamma. But is it a beautiful life? Learning about dukkha and smiling, accepting it? It's my question.
look, I can imagine, you know, beautiful life can mean different things to different people. So I'm not saying there's just, it just means one thing. I mean, you know, to me, when I hear about Ayakema, to me, she did a lot. She did an enormous amount. I see her life as a beautiful life, but you know, that's maybe in a different sense of a beautiful life to the way that you're using the term. I think both can be helpful ways of looking.
I see. Yes.
I mean, not only did she actually, before she was a nun, the first meditation retreat I did to was organized by her when she was called Ilse Lederman.
Yes.
So she was my introduction to Dharma practice. So, you know, deep bow to Ayakema.
Yes.
Yeah.
One other thing, beautiful life, when you have good people around you. You have teachers like Ayakema, Prakantipalo. I'm going back to the 60s.
Right.
I came to Australia and with the Hungarian dictionary. And opposite the place where I worked, small cake shop, Tansamai, bringing 3-4 Thai monks, rented a house. And then they were walking on the street and Prakantipalo smiled and I invited him in and gave him a piece of cake with coffee. And the neighbor said, "Oh, Frank, don't talk to these Hare Krishnas." I said, "No way, Hare Krishna." And my beautiful life began at the middle of 60s, knowing these fantastic people for so many, many years. And to learn about the Dhamma, because soon I'll be dead, who knows when. I feel I was on the good way, on the following a good direction, because I learned about life. I wasn't trying to be happy, just learn about the Dhamma, because that will make us really happy. At the moment, my family is falling apart. So much pain and so much suffering and so much ignorance, hatred, that without the Dhamma, I would be so unhappy. But the Dhamma helps me to get on the good direction, learn about myself, and that is coming soon, and I have to accept it. So I think this is a beautiful life for me.
Sounds lovely. Sounds good. Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Hi, Victor. It's Sarah.
Yes.
Hi. I loved your talk. Thank you. It made me think a lot. And shame is something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately and reflecting on in myself. And what I've discovered is that shame can often be, for me, a driver of behavior about what I think others will think of me, not necessarily a way of connecting. And that's why I really liked when you talked about how there's this beautiful life is about connecting back to what you value and needing to reflect very keenly on what you value, and then seeing how that can then be played out in life. And it's kind of interesting how shame drove me away from simple things and you know, of caring for my elderly father who has dementia, or caring for my son, and just doing those jobs, those simple jobs well. And I think that I think that might be why, I mean, I'm interested in your thoughts, but that might be why shame has gotten less, you know, it's not used so often in our current culture. Conscience, I think, is a different thing, and I can see how they're related. And then also when I, you know, even though conscience isn't used often amongst younger people, when I've been volunteering teaching the primary ethics program at the local primary school, and it's really amazing class where they sit and they talk about values and they reflect on their own values and they learn to disagree and agree with each other and learn to express their beliefs and then hear other people's beliefs and then find out for themselves by discussing amongst themselves rather than being told by an adult how they feel comfortable behaving. And it's really interesting how all those kind of moral values, even though they might be ingrained into them by their parents, it kind of resolves itself in amongst a group of 7-year-olds by themselves.
Wow.
So it's that beautiful thing of, I think it's that beautiful thing of realizing that if you do reflect on your own values, and you actually are not shameful about expressing them and having them discussed and disagreed with, then shame has two, you know, it's a double, like everything, double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, just a comment for a start. I was reflecting in the lead up to the recent election, federal election. There's actually values behind a lot of what the different political parties said, but they weren't explicit about those values. You know, if the values were, all policies have values in the background, but somehow the values weren't really talked about directly. Okay, it's great to hear about 7-year-olds. It's quite a big area where that area of that where shame goes to guilt and where it hangs around, and where people are concerned about their image, and you know, shame then influences what they do, which I guess is maybe particularly for younger people, an issue that's maybe a little more prominent than many years ago. And yeah, maybe maybe shame has a not so good side there. It's actually like I dug this book out just, you know, it's been on, I read it a couple of years ago. It goes into, well, that whole area of shame and guilt, but I haven't read it recently. So yeah, I'm not sure that there's much more I can comment, much more I can say on that.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on that or something else? Or
hi, Victor.
Hi.
Thank you for that interesting talk. I think for me, it made me think of what you're saying. Is it more like instead of being happy, we should find our purpose and values and follow them? And then it made me think of when I studied the scientific revolution for a bit, there's a lot of scientists like Kepler and Copernicus, Galileo, there's always this view that it was science versus religion, but they were actually very religious.
Yeah.
And for them, they were like looking into where God was in the universe and the blueprint, God's blueprint in the universe and stuff. And I know in the Christian religion, it was really wasteful if you wasted your talents in life. So they kind of had that value of, if you had a purpose in life, it was your duty to go that way. And I thought maybe you mean it like that, but in Buddhism it's more a focus on being kind. So not wasting your Buddha nature. Is that
well
along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, yes, kindness and compassion and calmness and equanimity, well, and joy are really prominent in the Dharma. But I guess kindness can be much broader than just kindness to individuals. It can be kindness to a culture, it can be giving to a society. You know, I sort of wonder, let's say with Beethoven, what was it that was actually behind his passion for composing? I mean, was it a sense of beauty, or, you know, was he trying to provide something to others? I actually don't know, but to my mind, that it seems like that was probably the most helpful thing he could have done. Though if he was brought up in some Dharma cultures to be kind, would he have still done that? Would he have still just composed? I guess I'm trying to broaden out the possibilities and see, you know, what, you know, I used the word beautiful life, but you could also say a rich life, not in the monetary sense or material sense, but in another sense, a broader sense. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And is shame coming into the picture when we feel like we're not following our values, and it kind of steers us back in the right direction?
I think it can. I think it can. Yep. Yep.
Thanks.
So, somebody else?
Hi, Victor. Thanks for the talk. It was super interesting. Thank you. I guess it's very, very fascinating to me thinking about shame and kind of wondering about shame in relation to conscience. I think that framing that you gave of those Pali words, is it hiri and ottappa?
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Like, the more I practice Dharma, the more intense that feeling gets of like the repercussions of not acting as well as I could. I really noticed that getting stronger, and I feel like that's actually a good direction, or like a good compass for behavior. But then in terms of the word shame, I guess I feel like maybe this is like the way the world is changing these days, but you know, so many people have this sort of maybe like an inner critic, or, you know, their psychology is formed in such a way that, you know, there's these external beliefs that are imposed, and you find people that have a lot of conflict in their minds, and a lot of this criticism that seems to come from within. And I'm wondering if you could say any more about that, like the use of the feeling of shame as feedback about action versus the feeling of shame that seems to come from psychology and seems to be mostly like unhelpful or detrimental to living well.
It's a good question. It's a very good question. And I haven't got an off-the-cuff answer, but I totally acknowledge how prominent and hard to deal with the inner critic can be. It is such a strong force. Now, and I guess they are really related. You know, if you have an ideal view of how you should be, it might be a bit of an unrealistic view, and or how you should look, and you don't live up to that, then yes, you could say it's inner critic. You could say it's shameful, and that's, I guess, shame in a way that's not helpful. So I guess we need some way to distinguish between the helpful and unhelpful. And right now, I haven't got a good rule of thumb. But it's a really good point.
Maybe this is where Sangha comes in.
Say more. Say a bit more.
Well, I just feel like yeah, I'm not sure about the word conscience. I haven't heard it used that much, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe there's a difference there between like your individual conscience versus our sort of collective conscience. Our like, you know, as a society, what are we trying to move towards? Or yeah, maybe more specifically, like as a Sangha, as a community of practitioners, what are we trying to move towards? And I personally have just found so much support and care and kindness in the Sangha, but also honest feedback. And I think maybe that's part of it, like having friends on the path who are interested in helping you to make decisions and differentiate between what is shame in an unhelpful way and what is actually like a good call to action.
Yeah, yep. Look, Sangha can be invaluable. Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, Enkong, do you have any thoughts on?
I do.
On shame and inner critic and helpful and unhelpful shame?
I do. I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of, I wanted to say a lot, but again, I was keeping in mind, I came into this evening's talk by you pretty late, so I missed the earlier bit. So if I now take the risk, because it's in a way are inviting me, from the world of psychology, the psychological understanding about shame, if I may try to remember. First of all, there is healthy shame, and then there's unhealthy shame.
Yeah.
The healthy shame is actually helpful. You can watch sometimes children saying it to themselves, you know, oh, I'm so ashamed, I won't do that again, you know, or I've shamed my brother, and I don't want to do that again. That is healthy shame. But usually when we use the word shame, and the way it's used so far from the few people who've contributed in the last 5-10 minutes, it's actually the unhealthy one. which we can also call it as toxic shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, unhealthy toxic shame is painful, and more than painful, it paralyzes the individual. It locks you into isolation. So, for example, when we are in shame, we will do everything possible not to return to the scene of shame. We will even not leave our house just in case we meet someone who witnessed what we thought was shameful for us. So shame paralyzes us, gets us into inaction. That's toxic shame. Now, the difference there is the difference with guilt. Now, guilt is not so paralyzing. With guilt, I know I've done something wrong. I can show remorse, and better still, I can now do something to undo it.
Yeah.
I can go and say sorry to the person I feel guilty I've done something wrong to. Yeah, I can make compense. But with shame, I will take a long time to come out of it. And for very severe shaming, which is ultimately self-shaming, even when the abuser is abusing us, even when the tormentor is tormenting us, we collect some shame. Sometimes it's the shame of the abuser, what the abuser is doing to us. Very often it is our self-shaming that I should have fought back better, or I shouldn't have walked along that dark road. I shouldn't have, I should have,
yeah.
And that's why this terrible thing happened to me. Now that is the toxic, unhealthy, and there's nothing you can do immediately about it. Best of all, seek help.
Yeah.
But even that help, it has to be slow, gentle speech, right speech in the Buddhist way as well, to help the person realize it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. But it is understandable that we all have a natural tendency not to be able to tolerate our self-image after it's been violated, dirtied, soured in whatever way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Thank you. That's a lovely overview. Yeah, much appreciated. Yes, thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are some more perspectives. I've just given what is usually researched and written up inside the text on.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are many more perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just one more word. The Buddha called Heyde, shame, a treasure. The way I understood it, that when we have Heyde, shame, we should appreciate it. We should be happy for it.
Yes.
Without it, we would do many unwholesome things. I might be wrong.
Look, my sense is that it was only at the time of the scientific revolution and the what's called Western Enlightenment that terms like let's say self-doubt or terms related to the self came into common usage. But before that, those terms weren't there so much. So I'm wondering whether at the Buddha's time, there was this whole idea of the toxic shame that Enkong you know, talks about so well. I don't know of any suttas where someone came to the Buddha talking about how bad they feel about themselves. It doesn't seem to have been part of the culture back then. So I guess we need to take that into account when you know, looking now at what's in the Pali Canon. And I'm aware it's 1 minute to 9.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, look, thank you all. Thanks for inviting me. And hopefully see at least some of you next week.
But yeah, I'd just like you all to join me in thanking Victor. Thank you so much, Victor. It was a great talk. We really appreciate it. And yeah, just a reminder again that if you would like to give dana to Victor or to the association, the details are in the chat, and we'll make sure to post them again. But thank you all very much, and see you next week.